I am Torgo. I take care of the place while the master is away.
Well, I can see he doesn't pay you that much for it.
If stairs that creak and distant shrieking keep you up at night, take a midnight drive and you'll survive by the projector light. You're desperate for a taste of horror, hungry for the hunt, and the late night double feature's got a seat for you in front. Stabbing, slashing, gnashing fangs abound, all wrapped up in a cheap mask made of rubber. Beasts that feast on terror by the pound, so think before you ask for extra butter. The day is done, the time has come to lay your body down. The late night double feature starting now.
It's after midnight somewhere, so welcome to the Late Night Double Feature! I'm Clive Sinclair, and it's Manos Sequel Night. Although that means it's something of a triple feature then, since we need to first talk about Manos, the Hands of Fate. In 1966, El Paso, Texas insurance and fertilizer salesman Hal Warren made a bet with a fellow screenwriter that he could produce a horror movie on his own. Recruiting local actors and funding for the film, he created Manos, the Hands of Fate. Manos is the story of a family. Michael, played by Warren himself, his wife Margaret, and their daughter Debbie on a road trip to the Valley Lodge for a vacation. However, they get lost and instead find a weird old house in the middle of nowhere. The house's sole occupant is Torgo, this fellow with big knees who warns them that they cannot stay because the master would not approve. He then proceeds to let them stay anyway because he's not very good at his job. The Master, as it turns out, is the leader of some kind of supernatural cult worshipping a deity called Manos. The cult stays in hibernation most of the time and is made up of basically just the Master and all his wives. He awakens and the family is kind of terrorized by Torgo, the wives, and the Master, who all disagree on what to do with them. Some wanting them all to be killed, some wanting Margaret and Debbie to be brought into the cult, and others still only wanting Margaret and not Debbie. Torgo wants Margaret for himself, but the cult cuts off his hand for his trouble. In the end, Margaret and Debbie are brought into the cult, and Michael becomes the new caretaker. At best, this is a decent premise for a horror movie, but in what I'm sure is a surprise to film fans everywhere, a fertilizer salesman is not good at making movies. The camera that Warren rented could only film 32 seconds at a time, and no sound was recorded on it, with all the dialogue and sound effects poorly dubbed in later in post-production. Shots last too long, every scene drags out forever, and the dialogue is either incomprehensible or just repetitive. Torgo was, in theory, supposed to be a satyr, but in execution, it looks like that. None of this is helped by the musical score, which ranges from the weirdly jazzy and laid back to the, well, what is lovingly referred to as the haunting Torgo theme.
I'll get the luggage.
The film was laughed off the screens by the residents of El Paso and fell into obscurity until a copy of it was found, distributed, and eventually ended up in the hands of one Frank Conniff, writer and actor on a little show called Mystery Science Theater 3000. And if you're unfamiliar with that show, I pity you. Long story short, it's about a guy and two robots in space riffing on bad movies, and Manos, the Hands of Fate, certainly qualified for that, to the point where many believe it to be the worst movie ever featured on the program. However, it also was a great episode in general.
You know, every frame of this movie looks like someone's last known photograph.
That's not how you wear your Depends, Torgo.
Been hitting the thigh master, Torgo? Don't help me or anything, boss. Uh-oh.
With the increased exposure from the show, Manos became a cult hit, with new showings, additional riffings by alumni of Mystery Science Theater, and the reason we're here tonight. Follow-ups to the story of Manos, the cult, and Torgo himself. In 2016, Jackie Naaman Jones, who played Debbie in the original film as a child, launched a Kickstarter for a sequel titled Manos Returns. even though technically Manos wasn't even in the first movie. Directed by Tanya Atomic, the movie is a horror comedy set 50 years after the original film. Like the family from the original, a group of college students are on vacation, though with more distinct characterization. There's Pat, their beleaguered driver, just trying to get them to their vacation resort. The couple, Nikki and Jay, who spend more time making out than being invested in their own vacation. And finally, Clara, who arguably serves as the main protagonist of the film. She's recently escaped an abusive relationship, and the entire reason she's been dragged along on this trip is to try to make her feel better about things. They soon find themselves lost and arrive at the cabin, where they find Torgo, as well as finding their car unable to start. Also, their phones have no signal, the house is built on an ancient First Nation burial ground, and they are all 3 days away from retirement. Pat and Jay head off into the woods in the hope of finding help, while Clara and Nikki stay behind to wait in the house that they all admit is incredibly creepy and ramshackle. Things have changed quite a bit for the cult since the first movie. While the Master still has influence, he's only shown in brief visions rather than interacting with any of the characters. His actor, Tom Naiman, is one of the three returning from the original, and sadly passed away shortly after filming was completed. The other returning actors are Diane Adelson as Margaret, and of course, Jackie Naiman as Debbie. It seems that in the Master's absence, it's Debbie who has grown up to become the de facto ruler of the cult. To the point where Torgo now says of the four staying, Debbie and the Master would not approve. No explanation is offered for what happened to Mike. It's hard to imagine anyone being worse than Torgo at this job, but maybe he was stealing money from the Master and they fired him. And by that I mean literally lighting him on fire. Margaret has gone insane after 50 years with the cult, spending all her time staring into a mirror, hallucinating suitors, and a child version of Debbie that she's still acting as the mother to. The house is also now occupied by other people, possibly others who have traveled to the house and been sucked into the madness of the cult like Debbie and Margaret were, but who they are and what they're doing here is never explained. Pat and Jay are unsuccessful in their jaunt through the woods, only ending up back at the house.
Think there's bears in these woods?
I would hate to run up on one of them in the dark.
Or in the day for night. The Master's wives have embraced their more murderous and creepy aspects in the intervening 50 years, since they spend a lot of the movie stalking our heroes, laughing maniacally at them when they attempt to engage in conversation, and murder Torgo. Multiple times, in fact. But that seems to be par for the course for the house. People vanishing when you turn your back. The cultists walking places they shouldn't, and Nikki soon being absorbed into the cult and used as a sacrifice to Manos. The cultists bathe in her blood, yet like with Torgo, she's still alive. Pat and Jay are not so fortunate. Or rather, they are fortunate depending on how you look at it, since soon the other cultists descend upon them. Margaret stabs Debbie to allow Torgo and Clara to escape, though once outside, Torgo makes it clear he can't go with her, still in the thrall and power of the cult. Clara is soon rescued by two police officers the group had encountered earlier, but while they seem happy to get her away from the house, they too are followers of Manos. Manos Returns is not a great film. Some might argue that it's not even a good film. However, I would say it's a very enjoyable movie if you can get into the spirit of it. The movie is of course tongue-in-cheek about its status as the sequel to a legendary bad movie, lampshaded almost immediately when we're introduced to our heroes discussing bad movies like Sharknado or The Room. Or of course when they first meet Torgo, where the traditional Torgo theme is done in a goofier style for us to hear.
No way, look at the way his pants bulge out.
You would notice his bulge.
The four protagonists are snarky, not unlike people who review movies on the internet. Not that I know anything about that. Nor should anyone. The music is something we need to highlight though. As I said, the original movie score was bizarre to say the least. However, Corey Fujimori deserves a massive amount of credit because they took that music and managed to change the arrangement so that it's an actual horror movie score. The haunting Torgo theme is actually haunting now. In fact, it's arguably the main leitmotif of the film, along with the recurrent discordant piano from the original. The original music was supposedly just a collection of tracks purchased for use in the movie, not unlike a royalty-free track found on the web these days. Even the jazzy travel music has gotten an upgrade during the initial driving scenes. Oh yeah, it's a peppy, happy time on the way to the murder cult. While certain lines from the original are repeated in this one, they take on, at times, a more sinister bent than the original intended. For instance, Torgo's "there is no way out of here" is not just a warning, but rather a somber, fearful, reflective statement of his own situation, and of a larger one as a whole.
There is no way out of here.
The original merely had cliché when Mike's car stopped working and the family could not escape into the desert, nor could the local sheriff see in the dark. Here, there's not only some kind of spatial warp preventing them from escaping through the woods without returning to the cabin, but death itself is not an escape. Torgo can't die permanently. Losing his hand in the original movie didn't kill him. They use his decayed hand now as a way of controlling him through sympathetic magic, kept on Debbie's person like a keyring. It's basically one of those things that teachers put on the keys to the school bathroom whenever you need to go to it in the middle of class. The very beginning of the movie sees the cult stabbing Torgo and slitting his throat, and yet he is reborn afterwards. Another line that helps expand on the original comes from Margaret. Having spent 50 years in the cult, she's basically broken and gone insane. We first see her talking to Debbie in a mirror with the color saturated and being pleasant, but there's a moment where everything becomes grayer and she starts singing "Row, row, row your boat" to herself, as if thinking about that time together with Debbie and Mike in the car singing it is her happy place away from everything. After humming it, the saturation returns. It's genuinely disturbing and sad. The movie excels in letting the audience think about the darker implications of the original without needing to spell it all out for them. When Margaret is lucid, she pleads with our heroes not to stay, to run and not listen to the Master, because he'll say or do anything to keep them there and make you his. But the larger one comes from her repetition of a cultist from the original.
Killing doesn't help anymore.
The wives have all become gleeful and murderous as time goes on. Killing is their only way of enjoying themselves anymore after being trapped for so long. But for Margaret, there is no enjoyment to be derived from it anymore. Sadly, the movie's modern-day low budget versus the low budget of the original is kind of what holds it back. As Joel Hodgson riffed, every frame of Manos the Hands of Fate looks like someone's last known photo. Much like how the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre had a gritty, realistic, almost documentary style with its grain and design, the original Manos almost feels like a weird snuff film. If you had the sound turned off while trying to look at it, there's a grimy feel to it that makes it a little uncomfortable to watch. But modern cameras, even low-budget ones, are digital, and everything looks a bit too clean. With a larger budget, this could have looked as dark and uncomfortable as the original, but instead it looks like, well, an ultra-low-budget direct-to-video movie. Characters stand around in place a bit too long, the camera isn't steady when tracking someone, and the acting is mixed. Everyone's trying, but there are some issues. Pat's accent can be difficult at times to parse through because she speaks too quickly, though you can catch her meaning just by her tone at least. Jay is the snarkiest of the group, but his demeanor and acting are far too subdued and mellow despite what's happening. And then there's Torgo. Torgo is a bit of a disappointment, sadly. While there are plenty of sequences where his performer, Stephen Shields, is given a chance to display pathos and emulate Torgo's own limited physicality, his voice is far too controlled and calm compared to the warbly, strange syllable enunciation that the original possessed. He also lacks the twitchy mannerisms that John Reynolds possessed in the role. It's possible these aspects were downplayed deliberately, since Torgo is played much more sympathetically than in the original, now shown as more a victim of abuse by the cult rather than just a creepy weirdo who still works with them while demanding to have a wife of his own. For instance, in the original, Torgo pawed at Margaret's hair and watched her undress, whereas in Manos Returns, he touches Clara's hair more as a sad recognition that he'll never see her again. While not exactly a thoughtful meditation on abuse, it could be argued that abuse is a major theme of the film. At the very least, it's how Torgo and Clara forge a connection that makes him want to help her. Tanya Atomic and the entire cast and crew did a marvelous job paying homage to Manos while trying to expand on the ideas of the original. It may not be a spectacular movie, but it is one worthy of a look if you're curious. However, a few years before the sequel premiered, there was also a prequel to Manos developed, also including Jackie Neyman. So let's check out our second feature, Manos, The Rise of Torgo. Before then, an attempt had been made by writer-director Rupert Munch Sr. to create a sequel to the original called Manos: The Search for Valley Lodge. As another low-budget independent project, filming occurred over the course of a few years and included Jackie Naiman and her father, but according to her, Munch was a bit of a jackass and would often exaggerate his own accomplishments while threatening people to get his way. While filming apparently proceeded far enough along to create a trailer for it, the film was officially scrapped in late 2013. Instead, Naiman appeared in this prequel movie, helmed by writer-director David Roy, who's mostly known for creating shorts. Which is ironic, since one of the main problems with this movie is that it is way too long. The Rise of Torgo is indeed the story of Torgo before he became the guy who took care of the place. But it's also the story of the creation of the Master. It is not what you would expect. The film begins with, well, a man in a loincloth in the middle of the desert who is contacted by Manos herself, played by Jackie Naiman in this, well, I suppose you could call it a special effect. You may also notice that her footage keeps jump cutting. That's not the editor of this video doing that. It's in the movie. Strange creative choice to leave frame rate stuttering in the movie itself, but let's go with that. So this caveman, or whoever he's supposed to be, is recruited by Manos in all her fashion queen glory to be her agent on Earth. She zaps him to give him powers and names him the Master.
You shall take wives and wear the mark of Manos.
I wonder if she was upset that he got a dog. That was never part of the instructions. I would say that Torgo's birth is more normal compared to the Master's, but that would be a lie. We not only see his mother in the process of giving birth, but Torgo's conception in a random car before being chased off by the sheriff's deputy. Rise of Torgo likes to reference and repeat a lot of stuff from the original Manos, as you'll see. Anyway, back to Torgo's birth, overseen not by a doctor, but by twin grandmothers who speak in unison before a magical Roma teleports in to say that Torgo will have a great power and lead a unique life before teleporting away again.
He looks just like a Torgo.
I think he looks like a baby, but I admit these glasses sometimes make it hard for me to see. Torgo grows up under the care of his mother and grandmothers, which mostly consisted of feeding him a diet of nothing but fried chicken and ice cream, and developed a beard by the age of 12 that persisted into adulthood. His wardrobe remained the same as well: big hat, overalls, and a plaid shirt. Meanwhile, it seems there was a previous caretaker before Torgo, Vasago, who, like his replacement, wanted a wife of his own. He abducts a woman who's really into goats to make his wife, but the Master finds out and kills him. The early days of the cult were really more of a dance class than anything else. The abducted woman is brought into the cult. Torgo's own life is not really any better as he's bullied, particularly by a group of girls of varying ages that he tries to be friendly to, who all proceed to beat him up for no real reason. Needing a new caretaker, the Master sends one of his wives along to collect someone, guided by a very sarcastic Manos for this task. And of course, the one she finds is Torgo, leading him back to the Master. He's brought under their mind control in one of the few actual horror sequences, a ceremony and magic spell filtered in red. Admittedly, the creepy atmosphere of the sequence is a little lost when it suddenly has Jackie Naiman shooting lightning out of her eyes from her JPEG dimension down at him. His legs are zapped to make them resemble the original, somewhat, and thus he's fully absorbed into the cult. While Torgo watches over a fairly faithful recreation of the original Manos house, though obviously newer, his mother desperately tries to find him. She eventually locates him at the house, but his mind has been warped so that he doesn't remember her. Since her car won't start, she goes after the cultists in revenge, succeeding in killing a few of the wives. However, Torgo arrives at her showdown with the Master and knocks the gun from her hands. Still under the Master's thrall, he tosses away the gun and leaves her to her fate at the hands of the cultists. And thus the film ends with a pair of women arriving at the house asking for directions, while it's revealed that Torgo's mother has joined the Master's wives. Manos: The Rise of Torgo is not a good movie. But unlike Manos Returns, it is not a fun movie. If Manos Returns was a horror comedy that leaned more on horror, then Rise of Torgo leans more on comedy. and as a result fails because it's just not funny. The majority of the humor comes from them simply repeating lines from Manos the Hands of Fate over and over, and expecting the audience to find it amusing that they're referencing the film. Manos Returns was trying to pay homage to the original while still being a little tongue-in-cheek about it, but Rise of Torgo is more like a Saturday Night Live sketch that goes on way too long. Pacing, in fact, is the major issue with it. Both Manos the Hands of Fate and Manos Returns, despite being slow films, are both a little over an hour long. Rise of Torgo is an hour and 28 minutes, and it feels even longer. They attempt to parody the original by having shots linger, suddenly jump cut to random items in a room, or just close-ups of an actor. Sometimes they'll even have breaks in the shot as if frames are missing, but this was very clearly shot with modern digital cameras, not a film camera where something like that could happen. Characters will also repeat dialogue multiple times to parody the original, but the effect is more tedious than funny when it's stretched out as long as it is. Strangely though, despite all the characters being dubbed in another bit of parody, the acting seems to be stronger here than in Manos Returns. Admittedly, that's hard to gauge because of their dubbing, but everyone seems to be a lot livelier, or at least willing to show more emotion than, say, Jay in any of his scenes. Jackie Naiman is hamming up her performance as Manos, though of course her presence in this is baffling. Manos is just in a very cheap CGI effect over a starfield in a glitzy outfit, occasionally speaking in an almost sarcastic tone of voice. Unlike her appearance as Debbie in Manos Returns, there's no menace to her at all, though it's likely they weren't even trying to make her menacing. Although having her as Manos brings up an odd moment. At one point, they cut to a statue that was inside of the house in the original film, but they just use a shot from the original film for this effect, even though it clearly is not the same digital camera used for this movie. Now, as weird as it is to do this, maybe they just didn't have a replica of this statue for the shot. Except later, when we're in the house, we can see that indeed they do have it, so why the insert from the original film? And I always assumed that that was a statue of Manos. But if Manos is a woman and looks like Jackie Naiman, then what is that a statue of? A similar thing happens when the sheriff is out looking for the now missing Torgo, but the photo he shows is of John Reynolds from the original. Paying homage is one thing, but it just seems weird to include that. Mind you, that's another issue of pacing. In the original film, there were a couple of scenes featuring a couple making out in a car and the sheriff shooing them off. This movie has 4 replications of the couple making out, with diminishing returns for any sort of joke out of it as it goes on. It's just an excuse to repeat more dialogue from the original, and this movie loves that. Drinking games can be made out of Manos, God of Primal Darkness, or Look After the Place While the Master is Away. It's kind of incredible how many times they squeeze either line in. Look After the Place While the Master is Away should get special mention because the filmmakers seem to think it's the funniest damn thing. It's even the final line of the movie, aside from a pointless post-credit scene, and it comes across like it's supposed to be a capstone for the film, but it's been said so many times it doesn't mean anything. Problems abound for the film, particularly as a prequel. It lays out how certain things happened, but not why they happened. For instance, Manos making some random caveman or whatever the master, and granting him robes and telling him to take wives. Why does she do this? Why is he now called the master? Why must he take wives? No one's interested in answering that. It's just that there was a guy called the Master in the original movie who had wives, and it needs to happen. So just have it happen with magic. Everything's just a foregone conclusion. Hell, as a child, Torgo plays his theme on a xylophone, and they decided to just put the normal Torgo theme over that as if they were afraid the audience wouldn't get it. Which, I hate to break it to you, but I sincerely doubt anyone is going into Manos, the Rise of Torgo, without already being familiar with the source material. On the subject of music, that's also a major disappointment. Aside from a cover of Forgetting You, the ending credits music from The Hands of Fate, Rise of Torgo just reuses all of the original film's score. While it's utilized better than in the original, it still doesn't work that well, assuming there's music at all, because another way this film drags is by having long conversations without music to help set the mood. When the movie tries to be original, its creative decisions are strange, to say the least. The twin grandmas eating in unison. The magical Roma who teleports in and then leaves just as abruptly. Torgo only eating fried chicken and ice cream. The 12-year-old with a beard. Flashbacks done in picture frames. Makes a little more sense as a parody, but still an odd decision. Manos in a weird CGI circle over a Starfield JPEG. All these things just make you wonder why? Another one that I actually would have somewhat liked is them doing some color alterations. The Master and his wives have had their skin pigment adjusted digitally, so they're almost in black and white, often with bright yellow or red eyes. The effect can make them appear almost corpse-like, which is a very interesting idea, except they'll only do this to their heads and necks, not to their exposed arms. So it just looks like their faces are painted up for no reason. Outdoor shots also have a problem with their color grading, since often it will appear that they've been green screened into the scene even though they haven't. Probably most confusing of all is the casting of Matt Rogers as the title character. As I said, he's not a bad actor, but he looks and acts nothing like Torgo. Torgo in the original is short, skinny, sleepy-eyed, twitchy, awkward, stuttering, and had dark brown hair. Matt Rogers is taller, heavyset, pleasant, a redhead, and childlike and innocent in his performance. You honestly do feel bad for the character when the women are beating him up for no reason, but there's nothing about him remotely Torgo-like. Visago honestly felt and acted more like Torgo. Danny McCarty as the Master is much better, thanks to already resembling the Master and knowing how to be as over-the-top as Tom Naiman was. Mind you, his performance is a little easier to parse because a lot of it is just repeating the Master's lines from the original. But at least he resembles the role. There are a few bits of humor that do work, a few jokes that land, but not many, and they are spread out far and wide.
Go and procure new pants for the caretaker.
She took my boy. And she was trying to kill me with sticks and such.
I am the Master. I serve Manos, god of primal...
I know already.
Moments like these break up the monotony of repeating the original movie's dialogue or giving some snarky observation about the situation and work a lot better. It should have been more of this and less just saying that Torgo will take care of the place blah blah blah. But yes, if you want to see a follow-up to The Hands of Fate, Manos Returns is worth your time. Best to just skip Rise of Torgo. As for the future of Manos sequels, prequels, and remakes, nothing is certain at the moment. Darkstone Entertainment, which produced a very entertaining remake of Plan 9 from Outer Space, released a trailer in 2019 for a remake of Manos, but there doesn't seem to have been any progress on it since then. Hopefully it'll get made, since the teaser looks pretty impressive, and if their remake of Plan 9 is anything to go by, it'd be a lot of fun. And perhaps we'll be checking that out in a future installment. For now though, I'm Clive Sinclair, reminding you that it's just after midnight somewhere, so you might as well watch some movies.
Look, now that we have a friendly sign with an arrow on it, why don't we just follow it? What's the worst that could happen?
Murder hippies?
Hello my friends, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications on new video releases. If you'd like to support future videos, you can check out my Patreon or purchase a t-shirt via Teespring or Shark Robot. Thanks for watching!